Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu salam ala Rasulullah. We continue reading from Imam Al-Ghazali's Deliverance from Error, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal. We have read about the Mutakallimin, about Ilm al-Kalam, since he already ended up with 4 classes of seekers. We have read about one. The next one is about philosophy. He said, on the gist of philosophy, what is blameworthy in it and what blameless, what doctrine lays its proponent open to the charge of unbelief, and what doctrine lays him open to the charge not of unbelief. But of innovation, bid'ah, and an expose of what the philosophers have stolen from the sayings of the men of truth and mingled with their own affirmations to promote the circulation of their own errors together with those truths. The men of truth, since he's speaking about philosophers, don't think that he's speaking about a Greek context. This is not Athens. This is Baghdad. This is Nishapur. This is because really he says Kalam Ahl al-Haq, those who are who follow revelation. So it's not the Greeks. It's about, in this particular context, most probably Imam Ghazali is speaking about the Muslim philosophers, and I say Muslim philosophers because they are not Christian, they are not Jewish, though he would render them, he declared them non-believers on 3 accounts, as as he will detail. I hope that we will reach there. Today I doubt it. It's like 15. We are 15 pages away from that, but I hope that we'll be able to reach there as soon as possible. And an expose of what the philosophers have stolen from the sayings of the men of truth and mingled with their own affirmations to promote the circulation of their own errors, together with those truths, and how souls come to feel an antipathy for those truths, and how to extract the unadulterated truth from amid the counterfeit and spurious views found in the aggregate of the philosopher's teaching. After finishing with the science of Kalam, I then started on philosophy. I knew for sure that one cannot recognize what is unsound in any of the sciences unless he has such a grasp of the furthest reaches of that science that he is in the equal of the most learned of those versed in the principles of that science. Imam Ghazali used the word ilm here. It's a field of knowledge, it's a subject. Then he must even excel him, and attain even greater eminence, so that he becomes cognizant of the intricate profundities which have remained beyond the ken of the acknowledged master of the science. Then and then only will it be possible that the unsoundness he alleges will be seen as really such, to become an expert in the field, and to not only to be a match with those who master the science, but even to go beyond what they have achieved. I noted, he said, Imam Ghazali, I noted, however, that not a single Muslim divine had directed his attention and endeavor to that end. He's speaking about the Muslim scholars ولم أرى أحدا من علماء الإسلام. Not a single Muslim scholar had directed his attention to and endeavor to that end. What the متكلمون had to say in their books, where they were engaged in refuting the philosophers, was nothing but abstruse, scattered remarks, patently inconsistent and false, which could not conceivably hoodwink an ordinary intelligent person, to say nothing of one familiar with the subtleties of the philosophical sciences. I knew, of course, that undertaking to refute their doctrine before comprehending it and knowing it in depth would be a shot in the dark. So I girded myself for the task of learning that science by the mere perusal of their writings without seeking the help of a master and teacher on his own. I devoted myself to that in the moments I had free from writing and lecturing on the legal sciences, and I was then burdened with the teaching and instruction of 300 students in Baghdad. It does say something about the status of Imam Al-Ghazali. When we talk about these 300 students, uh, we don't talk about really, this is not for children. In some description, uh, it has been described as 300 turbans. So they are well educated, 300 turbans who attended his lectures in Baghdad. Let me say that since the historical accounts about two in particular who attended, and they must have attended at least once, since it is mentioned, the heads of the Hanbali school in Baghdad, Abu Wafa ibn Aqil and al-Baghdadi, they have uh, they have attended Imam Ghazali's lectures, at least one lecture since this is mentioned. Still, Abu Wafa ibn Aqil did not really follow Imam al-Ghazali. He was critical of Imam al-Ghazali, but this is a moment when we talk about not only that Abu Wafa ibn Aqil attending Imam Ghazali's lecture at the Nizamiya, but also people might be surprised to realize that there were Hanabila, they were amongst the Ash'ira. Again, it might be really a surprise, not only to some, maybe to many, but there were historically Hanbalis, because for the most part, the Hanbali school follows the it's Athari, it's the It follows the methodology of the scholars of Hadith. Uh, it's a long story, but suffice it to say that there were historically Hanabili who were Ash'arites. As it turned out, through me reading in those embezzled moments, God Most High gave me an insight into the furthest reaches of the philosopher's sciences in less than 2 years. Then, having understood their doctrine, I continued to reflect assiduously on it for nearly a year. So, we talk about almost 3 years total, coming back to it constantly and repeatedly, re examining its intricacies and profundities. Finally, I became so familiar with the measure of its deceit and deception, and its precision and delusion, that I had no doubt about my thorough grasp of it. So here now my account of the philosophers and my report of the substance of their sciences. For I observed that they fell into several categories and noted that their sciences included several divisions, but to all of them, despite the multiplicity of their categories, cleaves the stigma of unbelief and godlessness. Yet there is a marked difference between the older and the oldest of them and the more recent and the earlier, in their distance from and closeness to the truth. The categories of the philosophers and the fact that the stigma of unbelief is common to all of them. Know that the philosophers, notwithstanding the multiplicity of their groups and the diversity of their doctrines, can be divided into three main divisions: materialists, naturalists, and theists. These are الدهريون الطبيعيون and الإلهيون. The first category, the materialists, were a group of the most ancient philosophers who denied the existence of the omniscient and omnipotent creator ruler. They alleged that the world has existed from eternity as it is, of itself and not by reason of a maker. Animals have unceasingly come from seed, and seed from animals. Thus it was, and thus it will ever be. These are the godless in the full sense of the term. وهؤلاء هم الزنادقة. Uh, Today you'll find uh, prominent um biologists, scientists, prominent, uh, well established in the field, but does it mean that they everything that they write is sound? Who are atheists, astrophysicists, and the percentage is very high amongst Western scholars. And if you happen to subscribe to a creationist worldview, you most probably will not receive funds for research. You will be uh, sidelined. It might be even worse. And those scientists They subscribed. So an atheist, astrophysicist would subscribe to a worldview where there is no God. But compared to what Imam Al-Ghazali, about those whom Imam Ghazali is really talking about right now, I mean, as we have just read, uh, the contemporary sophicists subscribe to the Big Bang theory, which means there was a moment in which this universe began. So you cannot subscribe to the idea that it has existed from eternity as it is, of itself and not by reason of a maker. Has existed from eternity, no beginning. But still, once we come to that moment when time equals zero, almost like the very last, even part of a fraction of a second, the scientists do not have an explanation why the Big Bang theory, why the Big Bang, why that event, why that uh, immense explosion took place with and I really did not read or listen to anyone speak about they do speak about the immense heat that existed, so much so that no protons, neutrons, electrons, nothing exists differentiated yet. They spoke about material soup, which means that our universe was, um, you know, uh, it was sterile, and as such, there's, where did life come from if the universe was sterile with that kind of heat? The second category, the naturalists, were men who devoted much study to the world of nature and the marvels found in animals and plants. They also were much taken up with the dissection of animal organs. In these they saw such marvels of God Most High's making and such wonders of His wisdom that they were compelled, with that in mind, to acknowledge the existence of a wise Creator, cognizant of the aims and purposes of all things. Indeed, no one can study the science of anatomy and the marvelous uses of the organs without acquiring this compelling knowledge of the perfect governance of Him, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who shaped the structure of animals, and especially that of man. I, the general narrative about the human brain is that we have 100 billion uh, neurons, and there was a neuroscientist from Latin America who tested four human brains, male, who donated practically after their death. She homogenized the brains, and she claims that the actual number of the neurons is about 85 billion, but that's not the point I'm raising. She compared the human brain to that of gorillas, who have probably around uh, almost like a quarter, less than a quarter of the human brain in terms of neurons, but she attributed this to human beings discovering fire. So they could cook food and have higher uh, like a diet which has higher calories, and thus the human brain became what it is. And the question is very simple: if we give, well, gorillas, I'm sure that if you know that a silverback, the dominant male, will be uh, is a massive animal, and they spend their day eating. The gorilla does not become of that size simply uh, by eating few calories. But suppose theoretically that you give a higher calorie one way or the other. You interfere with their diet and you give them a higher calorie diet. Would that really change the number of their neurons and they evolve? This is really the problem with scientists who, once they are in the lab, they are excellent. Once they come to the interpretation, that's pretty naive. That's pretty naive. A higher diet, and so the assumption there is that the human beings discovered fire before their brain became what it is, the 100 billion or 85 billion, as she maintains. However, it appeared to these philosophers, because they studied nature so much, that the equilibrium of the mixture of humors, he talk about an ancient composition, uh, here Imam Ghazali speaks about al-mizaj, اعتدال المزاج, equilibrium of the mixture of humors, had a great had a great effect on the resulting situation of the animal's powers. Hence, they thought that the man's rational power was also dependent on the mixture of his humors, that his corruption would follow the corruption of the mixture of his humors, and so that power would cease to exist. Once it ceased to exist, they alleged that bringing back the non existent would be unintelligible. So they adopted the view that the soul dies never to return. Consequently, they denied the afterlife and rejected the garden and the fire, paradise and hellfire, the assembly and the recall. So no hashr, no ba'ath, uh, and the resurrection and the reckoning. So they denied وأنكروا الجنة والنار والحشر والنشر والقيامة والحساب. So in their view, there would be no future reward for obedience and no punishment for disobedience. Therefore, they lost all restraint and abandoned themselves to their passions like beasts. And you look today, I mean, it's without all this atheism or denial of afterlife, or um, practically in in many, almost all Western countries, definitely certain things in the United States, which which is the predominant, Western liberal uh, democratic capitalist power. Alcohol is legal. Marijuana, in many states is legal, and it's down the road. It probably is all of them. Gambling. You have uh, it's shocking. Sometimes you walk in certain European cities and gambling casinos are uh, dotting the streets. Uh, Gay marriage. No one talks about the language of adultery disappeared. They talk about extramarital affairs. That's the so religion. The language itself has been secularized, if you will. What else? Certain European countries have unions for prostitutes, like unions for other professions. And I'm sure if I squeeze it, I can think of more examples. Uh, Nudity. So and certain, the depravity of political leaders and many notables and who in the West who are involved in you know child. It's really legally it is rape, but it shows that they are on a sled going downhill. Camouflaging everything under the rubric of uh, freedom and human rights. And so Imam Ghazali says, therefore they lost all restraint and abandoned themselves to their passions like beasts. These were also godless men, because basic faith is belief in God and the last day. And these men denied the last day, even though they believed in God and his attributes. The third category, the theists, Al-Ilahiyun, as Imam Ghazali says. The theists were the later philosophers such as Socrates, the master of Plato, the teacher of Plato, and Plato, the master of Aristotle, the teacher of Ustad of Aristotle. It was Aristotle who systematized logic for the philosophers and refined the philosophical sciences, accurately formulating previously imprecise statements. Let's remember that Imam Ghazali, to my knowledge, was the first Muslim scholar to uh, adopt logic, include logic as he included logic in as a topic in usul al-fiqh, like in Mustafa, and practically made it a condition for the mujtahid. While there are scholars, Muslim scholars, who would shun logic until today. It was Aristotle who systematized logic for the philosophers, refine the philosophical sciences accurately, formulating previously imprecise statements, and bringing to maturity and crudities in their sciences. Taken all together, these refuted the first two categories of the materialists and the naturalists. We will reach where Imam Ghazali deals with the topics that the philosophers deal with, such as math, logic, metaphysics, etc. Indeed, the arguments they advanced to lay bare the enormities of the latter, they relieved others of that task. And then Imam Ghazali quotes a verse from the Quran, and God spared the believers from fighting, meaning the unbelievers. وكفى الله المؤمنين شر القتال. Though Imam Ghazali uses it as a more of a prose. So by reason of unbelievers on infighting. Then Aristotle refuted Plato and Socrates and the theists who had preceded him in such thorough fashion that he disassociated himself from them all. Yet he, too, retained remnants of their vicious unbelief and innovation, which he was unsuccessful in avoiding. So they all must be taxed with unbelief, as must their partisans among the Muslim philosophers, which is the key issue here, such as Ibn Sina and Al-Farabi, and their likes. None, however, of the Muslim philosophers engaged so much in transmitting Aristotle's lore as did the two men just mentioned. What others, of course, Al-Farabi is not exactly. There was a problem in categorizing Al-Farabi at the time. So none, however, of the Muslim philosophers engaged so much in transmitting Aristotle's lore as did the two men just mentioned. So again, saying that Farabi was Aristotelian is not really accurate. What others transmitted is not free from disorder and confusion, and in studying in one's mind becomes so muddled that he fails to understand it. And how can the incomprehensible be rejected or accepted? The sum of what we regard as the authentic philosophy of Aristotle, as transmitted by Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina, can be reduced to three parts: a part which must be branded as unbelief, a part which must be stigmatized as innovation, and a part which need not be repudiated at all. Let us now set this forth in detail, and inshallah, tomorrow we'll begin the reading with the divisions of the philosophical sciences. Until then, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.